Continue talking about these, let's say, advanced scheduling control techniques that we already have covered. I've decided to extend this, to make this more, let's say, supported with real world example and steps, so you can understand each of these techniques with their applied steps, so you can also apply it in real world scenarios. A well-controlled schedule ensures that the project stays on track and, let's say, the tasks and are completed on time. And without a proper control techniques, let's say delays can accumulate and leading to cost overruns and stakeholder dissatisfaction. This session will explore the most effective tools and will highlight these techniques that we might already have covered in the first session for controlling the project schedule, helping you proactively manage the deviations and ensure successful project execution. To talk again about the critical path or CPM. So again, we talked about the CPM and we say that it helps the project managers to determine the longest and the shortest sequence of dependent tasks, ensuring they receive the highest priority. We also talked about the float or slack. Already we all have covered also the total flat or the free float. So the total float here you have is we talked about the amount of time a task can be delayed without affecting the project completion or the project overall timeline. The other hand, you have the free float where it's the amount of time a task can be delayed without delaying the subsequent tasks. So again, the critical path represent the sequence of tasks that must be completed on time and to prevent any project delays. And the tasks on critical path have zero float, meaning that, let's say, any delay will directly extend the project duration. So again, these tasks where it have, let's say, zero float, the critical path, it means that any delay will directly extend the project execution. So by identifying these type of tasks which have zero float, the project managers can focus their efforts on ensuring time completion of each of these tasks. Let's now look into these steps where you can start applying the critical path method. And by following these steps, including first to apply the critical path method to your project, first you need to start with listing all of the activities. And if you recall that when we worked at the WBS, where we have identified all of the required tasks, work packages, and we've set the deadlines to each of these. So this could be a very good, let's say, resource to you to capture all of these activities and tasks. So first, you need to list all of the activities or all of the tasks by identifying all of the required tasks. Next, you need to determine the dependencies. Determining dependencies is like establishing the sequence of tasks. So if task A depending on B, so you need to put A and then B and then C and then D or whatever until you, let's say, finish the task or to finish that work package itself. So again, the second, let's say, step here is have you need to do is to determine the dependencies between all of these activities. Next, you need to estimate the duration. And if you recall, when we have built our, let's say, schedule or planned our schedule management, we have estimated the durations by aggregating all of the project activities or tasks with their estimated times. Now it's like the same thing when you do the schedule planning, where you assign a realistic duration to each of these tasks. Next, you need to develop this network diagram, and we're going to cover this network diagram, and we'll see how it present, let's say, to show you or to visualize these task dependencies between all of these project activities. So again, the third step here is that we need to estimate the duration. After we estimated the duration to each of these tasks, now it's the time to develop a network diagram, which will help you to visualize the task dependencies and hierarchy. After you develop this network diagram, you will be able to identify the critical path. And again, the critical path You can find it by finding the longest sequence of dependent tasks. Finally, you need to monitor and adjust. And monitoring and adjusting is like continuously tracking the progress and updating as needed. And by following these steps, the project managers can gain better visibility into task dependencies and also can proactively adjust the resources to meet the deadlines. Remember that a well structured, let's say, critical path approach prevent last minute surprises and keeps the execution on track. Let's take here an example. Let's say that if you are building a software, let's say project or developing a software which follows a structured workflow, think of these activities as a high level. First, you start with requirements gathering, also requirement analysis, and then design, and then coding, and then testing, and then deployment. Finally, you monitor. So if the coding, let's say, phase takes longer than expected, of course, it's going to impact the testing and deployment. So by analyzing the critical path of, let's say, the coding, let's say, phase, project managers can allocate extra, for example, resources to the coding phase, and that will help them reduce the potential delays. Again, we are back to the schedule compression techniques. Again, so we talked about crashing and fast tracking. So crashing here again, it means like adding more resources to the critical tasks to shorten the schedule and how we can use it and when to use it. So you when you want to use crashing, let's say that if the project is behind the schedule and there are an additional resources are available, so you can allocate these additional free, let's say, resources or available resources to the special task or to special activity, um, that will help you, meeting the deadline or saving the wasted time. So again, if the project is behind the schedule and there is an additional resources available, you can, use the crashing technique as part of the schedule compression. You also can, let's say, use crashing when there is a budget constraints, let's say, allows for increased costs. There are some, let's say, drawbacks to the crashing technique. First is that you need to consider that crashing is will cause an increased costs, okay, due the additional labor or material. So when you are adding an extra resources, even human resources or let's say material resources, think that this will be having an increased cost due the additional labor or materials. Also, the other drawback here is that it might potentially reduces the efficiency if there are too many resources are assigned. Think of one task that it has 10 people who's working on it. So it might, we are not saying for sure, but we are saying that it might, let's say, reduce the efficiency if there are too many resources are assigned to that task. Now let's move to the next technique here we talked about, which is fast tracking. And again, fast tracking means finding these tasks which can be conducted in parallel and then performing these tasks in parallel instead of sequentially of in a sequence. When to use fast tracking? To use fast tracking, think when there are some overlapping tasks that won't compromise the quality of the project. So you can, uh, let's say, fast track these activities. For example, if you have a project where you have to install 10 devices or 10 PCs in one location, think of these that the let's say start by installing the table, so you can assemble all of these tables at the same time, and then let's say you start adding these PCs or devices to the tables, so you can fast track it or you can perform these tasks in parallel instead of waiting for a sequential say order. So again, when to use the fast tracking, we say that when there is overlapping tasks that won't compromise quality. Also, you can use it when the project deadline must be met with a limited additional costs. The drawbacks for using the fast tracking here is, let's say that you might face an increase of the risk of rework, because when you start doing things, you might compromising the quality, as we said, uh, and there is a less focus on the task itself, so the quality might be, let's say, impacted. So the drawbacks for not having an efficient fast tracking is increased risk of rework if the dependent tasks aren't fully completed. So again, crashing here, to summarize our session on crashing and fast tracking, we talked about crashing is useful when there is a time, or when the time is more critical than cost. Again, crashing is more useful when the time is more critical than cost, while fast tracking is effective when a tasks can be safely overlapped without having a risk of rework, and not completing the tasks incomplete. Choosing the right technique depends on the project constraints and risk tolerance.